in Tallahassee, Florida. I'm a sustainable ag specialist at NCAT, and I cover the northern part of Florida as well as Georgia.
You, sir. And I always forget to say this, I serve the Gulf states, but primarily south of Okeechobee and the Caribbean territories, Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands. And then Seth, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm Seth Phillips. I'm the Livestock Specialist at Echo at our North America office in Fort Myers, Florida. So, yeah, worms are included on my list of livestock.
Awesome. I'm admitting last couple people here. I'm sure they'll keep rolling in. This is kind of an open forum in the chat. So the way this is going to work today is I've made a video. So Seth and I were out at Echo Global Farms where we filmed a video how to set up, maintain your vermicompost culture setup, as well as how to use the castings in your system. So we have a pretty short 20-minute video, so I hope you guys enjoy that. But if you have any questions during the video, you can always feel free to pop those in the chat, and then Seth and I will be actively responding. And after, we'll have a live Q&A so that we can answer long form, some more in-depth or special questions that you have. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to get the video rolling. So give me a couple seconds. You'll have to give me a thumbs up if everything looks good. All right, awesome. I'm going to go ahead and start playing this video, guys.
Good morning. Welcome to Echo. My name's Seth Phillips. I'm the Livestock Specialist at Echo's North America Impact Center, and today we're going to be talking about vermicomposting and how to build a worm bin from simple materials.
And my name is Julie Kyle. I'm a veterinarian visiting here at Echo for a time, and I am new to vermiculture, so I am going to show you that anybody can do this. I've been learning since I've been here in the past few months, and we'll talk about making worm tea and how to manage a worm bed, and show you how to water your garden with the compost.
So vermiculture is just the raising of worms on your farm, and there are a lot of different options for raising worms. There's different worm species, there's different types of beds, there's different materials you can use, and there's a couple of different products that you can get from your worms. So today we're going to talk about a couple of different ways to raise worms, and this is one of our larger worm bins. You do not have to have a bin this size in order to raise worms yourself. This is just a good size for what we want to produce for our farm here. And we're actually going to be making a smaller worm bin later that may be more applicable for you at your home. So this worm bin is made up of a double layer of cinder blocks with one layer sunken down into the ground. The more ground contact you have, the more stable your temperature is going to be, and the happier the worms are going to be. They do not like major temperature changes. So the more stable you can keep the environment, the more worms you're going to have in your bin. This lid is open on both ends and covered with some screen door material. You want good aeration on the top of the bin, because if you block the airflow, then you're going to end up creating an anaerobic system, and you're going to be growing bacteria that cause rot instead of composting, and your worms are also going to die. So you want a lot of airflow, but you want to keep insects and rats and anything that might be interested in your food scraps out of the bin. So the bedding in this worm bin is about 6 inches deep right now. And under that, we have a layer of canvas weed cloth, just to prevent any sediment from going further down in the system. Because on the bottom, it's flat concrete with contours, and it's actually angled from back to front so that all of the excess liquid can run from one end to the other. And there's a layer of rocks in between the concrete and the bedding that acts as a filter, and it keeps your bedding from sitting in the moisture, because then you're gonna start to have rot on the bottom of the bedding if it's got a lot of moisture contact. And so because this system is partially sunken in the ground. We've dug a hole here and we've got a way to actually catch the liquid that's coming out of the system. It's called leachate, and it makes a pretty good fertilizer. But we just have it running into a jug here. You should never be getting a ton of leachate. If your bucket's filling up really fast, it means your system is too wet. But you do want a way to catch whatever liquid does come out so that it doesn't stay in the system.
So now we're going to talk about worm bed management, and we'll demonstrate that with this bed here and its principles that can be applied to any system, big or small. So just about the worms that we have here are red wigglers, but there are other types of worms that you can use. The African night crawlers are nice because they come up and they deposit the worm castings on the top, and it's easy to harvest them. The red wigglers kind of deposit their compost or their castings throughout the compost. So I'd like to talk to you now about worm behavior a little bit. So they are creatures of the dark, and they do not like to be in direct sunlight. If you shine lights on them, they'll crawl down deep into the bed. So it's best to keep them in a shaded place on your farm, and also maybe to manage them in the early morning or late evening when it's not so bright. And also I want to talk about what you can feed them. So they really like coffee grounds are great, tea and tea bags. You can feed them fresh or even rotted fruit. They really love fruit. I've put watermelon rinds in there, and you find a ton of them underneath. Banana peels. I would go limited on dairy and high protein things like meat. So just a little bit. You can put some bones in there, which will take them forever to digest, but it's good for calcium content. Eggshells are fine. Things that they don't like are citrus. So they don't love lemon peels or orange peels. It's a little bit too acidic for their skin. They can digest paper. They can digest cardboard. You can throw those things in there too. And you'll find with experimentation what they like and don't like. Table scraps are fine. You just have to be careful about predators and varmints that get into the bed.
So let's get started with building the worm bin. There are a variety of materials that you can use when building a worm bin. I tried to select things that are available anywhere in the world. So anything you have that is similar, that will function the same way, will achieve the same result. So just use whatever you have. You don't need to spend a ton of money or make any big investments. You can just do it with things that you can find laying around. So we're going to start with this blue half barrel. The bottom, so you still have the mouths here, but they're sealed, they don't leak, and we're just going to leave them in there. We're not going to take them out. If you have a barrel that's missing these caps, then you can just use the other end of the barrel, which is a solid bottom. I chose to use the top of the barrel because it's got this really thick plastic layer around, and that's going to help it maintain some structural integrity. So you can make holes in the bottom of your bin. You want drainage somehow. I am choosing to use this little adapter. This is for a Chapin bucket drip watering system. They're available all over the world. They're pretty cheap. You could do the same thing with PVC pipe that you could buy at a hardware store. I chose this one because it has this little filter on the inside, and so that's just going to keep a bunch of sediment from ending up in the leachate, which is nice. All right, so now that we've got our hole drilled, we're going to install the adapter here. The end of the adapter actually has two holes, so we're just going to plug one of them with a bent piece of line. This is just 5/16 inch polyethylene tubing. You can find it anywhere. Then the other one, there's nothing to it. They just slide right in. And the side with your rubber washer is going to go on the inside. That's going to keep liquid from coming out around the hole. And I drilled the hole in the center of the bucket right in the middle where the lowest point is. So all of your liquid's going to be running towards that point anyway. So you're just going to make your outlet right there. And you can trim your line whatever length you need. But this is nice because you can direct it straight to whatever container you're going to be using. And it could be, if you didn't have access to an adapter, you can just drill a hole and set your bucket straight under the hole and it will drip in just fine. It just may be a little messier, and it's nice to direct it right to a certain spot. And so now that we've got the drainage set up, we're going to add a layer of rocks to the bottom. It doesn't have to be rocks. Rocks are nice because you can find them anywhere. They're free. You just need a layer of some sort of porous material at the bottom that's going to create a layer where air can access between the bottom of the bin and the bottom of your bedding. So for this size bin, this is about 25 gallons, 20 to 25, and I've got about 5 gallons of rocks that's going to go in the bottom. So we're just going to spread the rocks out evenly. To select the size of rock that I wanted, I just used this piece of wire. It's got 3/4 inch holes, and I just threw gravel onto it and shook it, and that filtered out all the small stuff, because you want the larger pieces so that you have more airspace and more space for your liquid to run. And so you need a barrier between your rock layer and your bedding. So this is just some old weed cloth, a barrier that just goes under the dirt to keep weeds from growing. You can use old canvas, you can use old clothes, just something that will filter out the sediment but that the water can run through. And so we're just going to line the inside of the barrel with this stuff. So for our bedding material, I just collected some compost from our banana circles, where we make silage from banana stalks, and all of our waste just gets thrown into a pile and decomposes. And it's made this really nice compost. There were actually worms already living in this when I harvested it, so we know it's going to work. And so we're going to add this. And then I have another bucket of composted pig manure from our deep litter system. So the animal manure is going to be really nice for the worms because it's nutrient rich. They're really going to like that. And it holds moisture really well, so it will help keep your worm bin from drying out. It's also, because it was part of the deep litter system, it's already inoculated with some healthy bacteria, which is going to be a really important part of your vermicomposting system. So now that we've got everything added, we're just going to mix it up. Now that we've added our bedding, we're going to leave a gap at the top. This is about 6 inches. You always want to leave a couple of inches to allow airflow from the top, and we're going to leave more than that to start with because you're going to be adding food scraps and stuff, and your bedding's going to be building up over time until you harvest. For some vermicompost systems, you're going to want to drill holes in the side of your bin to allow for more ventilation, because you don't want the moisture to build up too much. We've found here that the wider, shallower bins function okay with outside ventilation because they have enough on the top and the bottom. But if you're using a taller, skinnier system, like a 5-gallon bucket that's got a lot more surface area top to bottom than it does exposed to the air on the surface, then you may want to drill some holes in the side to allow some more air access. So we've got here these worms that we've already harvested from one of our other worm bins, and we're just going to put them in this system. They can go ahead and colonize it. We're just going to make a little bit of a dip right here in the center, and we'll put the whole thing down right there. So we have food scraps in here for them, just so to give them a good start. We've got some paper, and we're just going to cover them up a little bit so they don't dry out too much. And they'll have the system fully colonized probably within a matter of weeks. So you want to make sure that you have the correct moisture level in your bedding. This bedding is a little bit too dry right now, so we're gonna have to add some water. If you put it in your hand and squeeze it, there should be a few drips of water coming out. There's no water coming out of this. It should feel kind of like a damp sponge or a wet towel that's been wrung out. So not dripping with water, but moist. So we're just gonna add some water. And we're going to be adding a little bit more water since this is the start of the system. We want to make sure that it is all moist enough. Normally, you would only need to add a little bit of water, just enough to keep it at the right moisture level. But this is all going to soak through all the way down, and then whatever extra we have is going to run out into the bucket at the bottom. And so now we're done with the bin construction. You just want to cover the top. You want something that's going to allow airflow, but it's going to keep out light and insects and anything that might be interested in eating your food scraps. And so I'm just going to use this weed cloth, the same thing that I used to line the bin with, and put it over the top. And for something to keep the top down, you can, if you have a large piece of this, you can wrap a bungee cord or something around it. I found this tire with half cut out it's got enough weight to really keep it on there, and it's heavy enough that it will keep things like raccoons and possums from trying to get inside there. They would have a hard time lifting it.
So now we're going to switch to harvesting your worm castings, and one way you can do that is to get your worms to move from in this situation from one end to the other. And so what you can do is stop feeding them in one section and feed them on the other end, and that's what we've done. And you can just lay a stick so you can remind yourself not to put the food here, and also it allows it to dry out a little bit, which makes it easier for sifting. So we're going to take all the compost from this one end where I haven't been feeding, and we're going to run it through a sifter.
So this is a pretty simple machine. It's just an electric motor that is attached to this little bed, and all it does is shake it back and forth. You could pretty easily build one of these yourself if you have a little bit of mechanical or electrical knowledge, and it doesn't have to look this fancy or anything. It could be a permanent table. This one's on wheels, so it's nice. We can travel from our various worm locations, and this would be a pretty easy thing to construct. If you don't have access to something like this, you can build a hand sifter. This is something made just from some 3/8 inch hardware cloth and trimmed pieces of 2x4s, and you can just put your compost on there and shake it, and it functions exactly the same way. You can build them larger than this. You can even build them long, like this size, with handles for 2 people, and you can shake it back and forth. It's building a sifter is a pretty easy thing to do. You don't have to use a sifter at all for a small bin like a 5-gallon bucket or the one that we built today. When you're harvesting, you're actually going to be harvesting the entire bin, and you can just put it all straight on your garden. You don't have to worry about the sifting, unless you are interested in the vermicastings for a compost tea, in which case you would need a small sifter. But for something really small scale, you don't need anything mechanical at all.
Now we're going to demonstrate sifting the worm compost. And so this sifter has 3 holes, the finest, and 3 screens actually, or 2 screens. The finest one is where the worm castings are going to go, and then there's a less fine screen, and then the chunky stuff goes into the 3rd bin. So we're going to turn this on, and it's very simple. You just put it on here, and then you have to move it with your hands. I want to show you the 3 different screenings that we got. This is the actual worm castings, and it's nice and fine. This is great for making worm tea, or you can apply it directly to your garden. And then this is kind of a medium casting. It's a little bit bigger. There's some worms in here. We're going to actually put this back into the bed and let it decompose a little bit more. And then the bigger stuff, you got your leaf litter and sticks and other things. This is definitely going to go back into the bed for further composting.
So there's a couple different ways that you can make your compost tea. The value of the compost tea is really in the promotion of microorganisms in the soil. It does have a fertilizer value as well, but the microorganisms are really the reason to do a compost tea. So if you have access to electricity, you can use an aerator to make a 12 to 24 hour compost tea. And you can use a porous bag like this to put your castings in. You don't have to have a bag. It's just if you're using any kind of a pump, especially like an in bucket aerator, it's nice to keep the sediment out of the water. But you can, if you don't have a bag like this, you can put the casting straight in the bucket. So usually for this kind of a compost tea, you're going to do about 4 to 6 cups of vermicastings for a 5-gallon bucket of water. And then you can just hang it in there, let it soak, and you'll keep it suspended. You don't want the whole bag to sink. And put your air stones in. This is an out of tank aerator, so we just plug it in and it forces air through the stones. And you'll want to put the stones all the way on the bottom. So that's going to oxygenate the water and create an aerobic environment, so you're not growing anaerobic bacteria, which would be bad for your soil. And like I said, this takes 12 to 24 hours and it'll be ready to use. If you don't have access to electricity or you don't have an aerator, you can use a different method. It takes a little bit longer. It can be 36 to 48 hours, but it works just as well. And you can actually use way less vermicasting material. This is just a fry basket. It's available anywhere, and you just fill it up with your vermicastings. So you're just gonna hang your fry basket right at the top. That way your bacteria can propagate in an aerobic environment. And you can actually just let this sit for about 48 hours. And once you have a film across the top, they call it a biofilm, that's when you know it's ready. And you actually will dilute this at a rate of 10 to 1 water to compost tea. There's an abundance of microbial life in this kind of a solution. And if you really want to increase your bacteria count, you can add about 2 tablespoons of molasses. And that's just sugar, it's food for the microbes. So you can extend this pretty far because of the dilution rate, and it's very rich in microbial life. And it's also probably the easiest way of making compost tea that I have learned so far.
This is tea that I made yesterday, and so it's ready to be used on the plants. We'll just turn off the bubbler, pull those out. This is the compost, also can be put directly onto the plants. I'm going to probably put it on one of the trees here. And then you can pour it right in your watering can. So the nice thing about the worm compost tea is you can water directly on top of the plants, and or you can put it right at the base of the plants. It's safe for the leaves.
Thank you for joining us for this vermicomposting video. Just keep in mind, anybody can do vermicomposting. It doesn't have to be an elaborate system. You can use commonly available materials. Just things to remember: keep your moisture levels correct, make sure your worms are fed on time, and try to avoid changing the temperature quickly. If you have questions about vermicomposting, feel free to reach out to Echo. You can email us. Our contact info is on Echo's website, or you can go to echocommunity.org, where we have a discussion forum and people from around the world who have experience with a variety of things can help answer your questions. And we look forward to seeing you at the Q&A.
All right, awesome. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed that video. And so we can open it now to the Q&A portion of the video. If you guys have any specific questions, you could, speak into your microphone, or you could type it in the chat and we can reply vocally to that, whatever you're most comfortable with. We have a couple questions already. For example, Saul asks, how many worms should be left in the unfed side of the bin before you harvest the castings?
Julie, do you want to answer that one since you're the one who does the most of the management?
Yeah, the worms don't like it when it's dry and when they don't have food. So you will have some worms that come through the sifting, and you can just put them back in. It's not like you have to count them or anything. I find sifting is a lot easier if it's a little bit dry. So yeah, and the worms will move away from light too, so you can use that to your advantage.
And then we have a question from Ebony. She asks, what happens during the summer heat and winter cold for zone 6A, 6B? How do you keep it going year round?
Yeah, so we're in zone 10. So it may get down to freezing 1 or 2 nights in January, but it's not really a concern for us. As for being in the cold, the worms, the colder it gets, the less active they're going to be. And so if you're in a temperate environment, you would probably have pretty good success with a portable worm bin, kind of like the one that was mentioned in the comments earlier. Something that could be brought inside if it was going to get down to be really cold. There are, I'm sure, people who know way more than me about vermicomposting in a temperate environment. Echo's focused on the tropics, so I'm probably not the best person to answer. But if it's going to get down to freezing for an extended period of time, you would probably want some way to protect your worms from cold.
I think you had mentioned this in one of the questions before about somebody wanting to find worms or harvest worms in the natural environment in Nigeria. And so you made the point of, using this as an appropriate technology and making sure that it fits the resources that you have and the context that you're in. For example, we'll be doing another webinar about fish emulsion. And fish emulsion as a biofertilizer makes a lot of sense in areas that you have a lot of fish waste, like the Caribbean territories, for example. But maybe if you're in like Illinois, for example, fish emulsion doesn't make the most sense. So, using that as in the appropriate context, I think is important as well. We have a question here. Should we be wearing gloves during these processes? Doesn't really matter.
Because, as long as you're not accidentally putting, glass or something in there, it should be fine.
Yeah.
It depends on your personal ick factor, I guess.
Yeah. Or if you have some immune compromised situation, then it's probably best to wear gloves.
This is a good question. What is the shelf life of the compost tea, and how long can you store it for?
So I don't know the exact shelf life. If Julie, if you know, feel free to chime in. We do try to use it up pretty soon after it's made. The sugar from the molasses or the cane syrup that we were talking about, it will sustain the microbes for a short period of time, but I would try to use it, within a few days after making it.
Yeah, I agree, because if you keep it too long, or if the container gets hot,
then the microbes are going to die.
Yeah, I read that you can keep it for about 36 hours, and maybe another day if it's below 50, so that you can keep the bacteria alive. But after that, bacteria have such a short half-life that they would all just die out anyway. What should be the density of the worms that you want, and how do you know when to move some to a new container?
So we have a lady over in our retail who has a smaller worm bin that she's been managing, and she can just pick up like a whole ball of worms out of her bin. So that's probably too many. And then the worm bin that we have is probably too few. Actually, we're gonna swap them over, but you want to be able to pick up a handful and see worms in each handful. And that's ideal. If it's getting to be just a clump of worms, then it's time to separate them.
We have some questions about literature. So after this, we can definitely send this recording out to everybody, but also we can send relevant literature. I'm sure that Echo has some resources as well about vermiculture. So we'll send this as a packet for you guys that attended. And then they're asking about what kind of tea bags that you used in regards to making the filter for the compost.
Yeah, it can be any kind of a porous bag. You could use a coffee filter. Tea bags are going to be pretty small, but if you wanted to take the time to fill multiple tea bags or something like a hairnet, or if you have some sort of a more tightly woven, small fishing type net or screen door material would work really well. Gauze would work.
A stocking even could work.
Yeah.
Like a lady's hosiery stocking or a pillowcase or, anything that's not going to contaminate the water itself, but will still hold everything in place. So again, using what you have on hand is always a good call.
Yeah, cheesecloth might be a little bit too wide of holes, but the bags that we use, you can find them in the store here anyway for making jams and the like. So that's something you can try to find.
We have another question about some resources for reviewing this process. I think that there's so many ways to do vermiculture and so many different methodologies. We'll definitely send a couple. And again, Echo will send some in the packet, in the information packet out to the attendees here. Here's a question. Are the worms happy to have paper and cardboard pieces in the bin, and will they process it?
Yep. Yeah, they can process paper. Like we get shredded paper from the different offices around here, and we can, maybe you don't want that to be your only bedding, but you can certainly mix it in, and it helps to regulate the moisture level of the bin. If it's getting too wet, you can put something like cardboard or paper in.
It says, if exposed, will mosquito larvae be problematic, assuming they're sitting in the tea for around 2 to 3 days?
I mean, it would probably be better to cover it if you're concerned about mosquitoes. If you're using it pretty quickly, it's probably not going to be a huge issue, but maybe better to cover it just in case.
And I think the aeration probably dissuades the mosquitoes. Like if the water's moving, they prefer calm water.
Do you know if this is accepted for GAP regulation, so good agricultural practices, or organic?
If you, if you're doing it organically, I assume it would be. It just depends on, I guess, the materials that you're putting in your bin to start with and what you're feeding your worms with. I'm not a regulations expert, but I'm sure you could make it acceptable.
I think organic is all about tracing. So that's kind of the challenging part for doing a process like this for organic regulations, is that every part of your system has to be sourced and logged. undocumented. So, having to, if that's what you wanted to do and having to log and verify that everything that you used for this system was organic, for example. Is there an ideal pH? And should there be a check for salinity if the soil came from a previously chemically fertilized area?
I would say check your, the soil that is around you, and especially if you're harvesting worms from your own soil. If they're living in it, then you should be able to figure out pretty easily what your pH is, and so whatever that is would be acceptable. If it was, worms are a little bit finicky, and so if it's really high or really low in either direction, they're not going to be happy. But if it's, probably 5 to 8, somewhere in there, they're going to be okay.
Is cardboard with colored ink okay to use in the bin?
I would probably avoid the inks, if you can cut them out, or a little bit of black ink, obviously, in printed paper is fine, but I would probably avoid the colors.
And waxed cardboard as well. Be sure that you're not getting a waxed or treated cardboard.
Right.
Can you mix worm species together, like red wriggler and African night crawlers, in the same bin, or should you only use one at one time?
Each species is gonna behave differently in different environments. So species selection is really gonna depend, one, just on your environment in general. The African night crawlers are tropical worms. So if you're outside, definitely, if you're not in the subtropics, at least they're not going to perform well. Whereas the red wigglers will do fine across most of the US and similar climates, but it also depends on what kind of a system you have. The African night crawlers are nice because you can do a top harvest, so you can actually just scrape the top couple of inches out of your bin, and that's where all the castings are going to be deposited. And so you're not having to sift your entire bin to get your castings out. But the environmental limitations of African night crawlers are going to keep a lot of people from being able to use them. So you fit your worm to your environment and to your system, or fit your worm to your environment and then design a system to go with that worm.
Thank you. And then we have one last question here. If anybody has more questions, you can pop them in the chat. But you mentioned avoiding citrus due to acid. Are other acidic foods a problem, like tomatoes or different sour fruits?
You can try them. I would probably just make sure it's in pieces and spread it throughout the bin so that they have options. I mean, I do throw citrus in there, but they don't like it. It just sits in there. So you'll find out by trial and error what they like and don't like. But yeah, the acidity is maybe just put small pieces in.
And then I did look up the compost and vermicomposting for organic production, and it seems like it follows the NOP, the National Organic Program's definition of organic. So ensuring that you use only permitted non-synthetic or approved synthetic substances, primarily organic matter from plants and animals, maintaining aerobic conditions. So keep the process aerobic through methods like adding organic matter, turning, or using forced air, maintaining 70 to 90% moisture. You want to ensure sufficient duration of the composting so that you're not going to contaminate your food crops with harmful bacteria. And you want to include vermicomposting in your organic system plan, which your certifying agent will review. And of course, avoiding introducing substances that are not allowed in production. So I hope that answers some of your questions. You can find that on the USDA's organic portion of their website. A couple more questions. Do grubs or other unwanted species occasionally show up? And if so, how do you handle them?
We haven't really had that problem here. Yeah. Because of the worm bin is surrounded, it's hard for them to get in. We have had
What about
rats.
what about black soldier fly larvae, which aren't the worst, but not what you're looking for?
Well, with the lids closed, they don't seem to access it, and they like more rotting things, I think, to eat. And then the next question about city water with chloride in it, you can fill up a watering can or a bucket and just let it sit overnight, and it should take care of that.
And
Awesome.
with the larva and other stuff, you may not be able to see it well in the video, but all of our worm bins are, like Julie said, they're covered in some form. So we have screen door material. We actually have screen door material and kitchen wire or chicken wire on both ends of our large worm bin because we did have a rat problem. They chewed through the screen to get into the food scraps. So pest issues around the decomposing food may be something that you have to deal with. But we've pretty successfully eliminated the issues up to this point, at least.
Thank you.
I just want to give a little update on that worm bin that we made. I checked it right before this webinar, and it has remained a little bit too moist for helping the worms thrive. And also it ended up getting rained on where it was, even though it was undercover. And so I think they had mentioned earlier in the chat that it would be better to have some aeration holes on the side. So we still have it going. There's still worms in there, but they're not, filled up like we would have hoped.
Yeah. Thinking about it, especially after watching the video again, I probably, if I was doing this again, I might have simplified it even more than I did for the video, and I might have even just skipped the lining and drilled some holes in the side, and as long as they're small enough holes that you're not losing your bedding, I think you could use even less materials than we did and have a pretty good system.
If you didn't put the lining like you put before, would you still need to put a layer of something down to prevent the bedding getting in contact with the rocks?
Yeah, well, you could do a multi-layered, a porous layer at the bottom, so like larger rocks down first and then smaller rocks and then your bedding. Eventually, if you do it that way, you will, your rocks are going to get clogged up as stuff filters down, but you shouldn't be putting in so much water that you're actively getting sediment running down, so it would take some time. And that is, the lining should prevent that from happening, which is ideal, but not entirely necessary. If you don't have access to it, you can still do the worm bin.
We have a couple more questions. One is, would diatomaceous hurt the worms or the environment around? And then the second question is coconut coir good for starter bedding?
I probably would not use the diatomaceous earth. I think that might be damaging to them. And you can answer the other one, Seth.
Yeah, the coconut coir should be, it's a good additive, probably by itself. It's not going to be able to hold enough moisture to keep the worms alive, but if you mixed it in with something like some compost or something, it would be a good additive.
Then we have a question here about lime. The chemical or the fruit? I'm not sure.
If it's a pH related question, I'm assuming if you're feeding food scraps, especially like bits of vegetables and stuff that's left over, the vegetables are gonna bring the pH to around 5.5, somewhere between 5 and 6, most likely on their own, if that's the majority of what you're feeding. And then fruit, like Julie was talking about the citrus, it will make it a little bit more acidic, but I don't think if you're having to use lime to raise the pH, then you should probably be starting with a different material if it's in that bad shape.
And then we saw in the video how to make the vermicomposting or vermicasting tea, but how do you use the worm leachate that you showed in that jug?
So that, and like I said in the video, it should fill up pretty slowly. So it's not something that you're going to have a ton of. You'll have some, but you should be using little enough water that you're not getting a whole lot. But whenever you do get some, you can just dilute it a little bit with some water, maybe 50-50, because it's not going to be terribly strong. And I would just pour it on plants, kind of like a liquid fertilizer. It won't have a ton of nutritional value necessarily, but it will, the microbial value might be pretty good. So
Thank you. Well, if anybody has any more questions, I'll give it a couple seconds. You can always drop them in the chat. I've also listed my email address here in case you needed more information, or you wanted to receive this recording, or you had any more questions that the ATRA specialist or the Echo specialist could answer. I'll ensure that we get you the resources that you need, or I can direct you to the right person to answer your question. Awesome. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed it. Thank you so much for joining us, and don't hesitate to reach out if you need anything, but thank you so much. And thank you to Seth and Julie from Echo for sharing their information with us all. All right, guys, well, take care. Bye.